This evening, we'll have the chance to explore a certain question asked to one of the monastics here by one of his friends about the current situation, the current living situation that billions of people are trying to make work, trying to find meaning in. It's a very good question. And it's one that we should examine very closely, and so we're fortunate to have some time for that. The question was this. I was thinking about how we're all like monastics these days. Just curious about what we, society, could learn about living in lockdown from those who are living a monastic life. Yes, it's a good question. I was thinking about how we're all like monastics these days. Just curious about what we could learn about living in lockdown from those who are living a monastic life. Yes. So, it's a very good question for many reasons, and I'm going to start with a rather strange story. The community of practitioners who I have trained with is connected to a certain individual named Mario, who is a spiritual teacher, and he became a spiritual teacher because he died. He was stabbed. And he was dead for, I believe, several minutes, actually, before they revived him. And when he came back, he was a very different person. He was stabbed because of the sort of person he was. Not surprising, given the life that he was living, that he was stabbed in a fight. It is surprising, however, that he came back, that after he died, he could be brought back due to, well, who knows why, but partially due to modern medical equipment and also due to his own will. When he came back, he had deep wisdom. His lifestyle changed. And the way he talked about it was, he said, in his experience, in his subjective experience, during those minutes of being dead, from our perspective, he went through thousands of years of different learnings in what's called the Bardo, these various worlds between worlds. What we were talking about yesterday as the other world. So, in this other world beyond death, he lived in many different circumstances and learned from many different teachers. After thousands of years of this, he realized that it's all a dream. And then he realized how important it was for him to teach that, and so he, due to enormous will, found that body from a long time ago that could still take him back into this world, and he got back into it, and then they revived him, and then he spent years getting to the point when he could speak and live, because his body had been quite damaged in that, from our perspective, few minutes. And so he was very aware of death, the significance of death. And I bring him up because he said many things that impacted me. One of them is that in Harada Roshi and his community. In that community, we are involved in a few political issues, and one of them is fighting against capital punishment. That's just to say when people are killed for committing crimes. And one person asked him from our community, said, I feel very sorry for people on death row, very concerned about them. I feel fortunate that I can do something for them. What can I do? This is a sort of question. And his reply was quite apologetic. He said, I'm very sorry. I am trying to answer your question, but unfortunately, I can't see any difference between you and people on death row. Sorry. I know that you think that you're not on death row. I know that you think that you're in a different position, and so I apologize that I can't see you that way. But because of that, I don't really know how to answer your question. I thought this was a brilliant answer, and it impacted me deeply. We're all about to die. We're all the same in that way. All of us are, you could say, on death row. That's it. Our death is out of our hands, it's about to happen. Any time now. And so this distinction doesn't make a lot of sense. Actually, I think he answered the question fully. I think that his answer was, the way you can help people on death row is to see that you are in exactly the same situation. To try to help from a position of superiority won't work. But if you see yourself in that position, then you'll be able to help. I actually think he answered the question, and he also answered the question. That's very impressive. So I bring that up because I feel that I'm in something of a similar position here. The question goes like this. I was thinking about how we're all like monastics these days because we're in lockdown. And I feel like it's hard to answer that question because I'm sorry. I'm trying to see it from your perspective, but I don't see at all how people are living like monastics these days. It doesn't seem to be at all the case. So I'm going to try to answer this question and also answer the question, but the answer to the question that comes up first is, are you like monastics? Is that the case? In what way is it the case? And I did my best to consider how are people like monastics. I actually talked to a few people about this, trying to understand the question. What are the similarities between living in lockdown and being in a monastery? And I thought maybe it was the sense of sort of like, maybe I can't do much. That's what I came up with. That's all I had. I think that there's a sense that maybe monastics are solitary. I mean, you hear the word monastic or monk, and that does actually mean solitary. So maybe that's what it is, because monks, for a while, went off and lived as hermits. So maybe hermits and monastics are the same, and if you're a hermit, then you don't interact with people, and nowadays in lockdown, you don't interact with people. Something like this. But I want, before I answer the question about what we can learn about living in lockdown from those who are living a monastic life, I want to say, first of all, that what I see happening now of people living in lockdown is moving further, not closer, to my experience of living a monastic life. And so that is instructive for how the question should be answered. So, first and foremost, in my experience, living in a monastery means living in community. The interaction with others is the heart of the spiritual life. And in particular, most significant is that you are forced to be constantly in intimate relationship, very close, needing to work closely with people who you would never choose to interact with at all if you could avoid them. That is what it's like to live in a monastery. And that's an appropriate way to live in a monastery. These people who you would have never chosen to live with if you had the choice. But good news, you don't. And beyond needing to just live with them, you have to work with them. You have to care for them. You have to be cared for by them. That is a place of personal growth. Harada Roshi has said that you won't do a practice alone because you'll just do whatever you think you should do. Well, you can't practice a spiritual path if you're doing what you think you should do. You can't practice a spiritual path with someone else because you'll just spend all of your time agreeing about what you should do. That's not a spiritual path. But if you have 3 people living together, then there will be at least one bad relationship at all times. And that is where the training happens. And so I would say that I don't have the sense that people are living in more community now, needing to interact with dozens of people who they would never have lived with if they could have avoided it, in order to come to the point of being able to love each other whether or not we like each other. I don't have the sense that's happening much. I have the sense that lockdown is actually the opposite of that. But good news, some people are forced to live with, their families, their roommates, and are being forced to be close to them a lot more than they were accustomed to before. And so that is a real opportunity for training. Spending time with your family, coming to really dislike them, wish that they were someone else, anyone else, getting very frustrated with how insensitive and selfish they are. That's a great chance for practice. And so in that way, you could say that it is like a monastery. Because at that moment, when you don't like them, you have the opportunity to love them without liking them. And if you don't have a kind of love that transcends liking, well then, that's not a monastic kind of love. So good news, you can have a spiritual love with the people who you're stuck with in lockdown. So that's great. That's a real opportunity. And in fact, I've spoken to some people who have been through this. A month ago, they hated their families. Hated them. I was talking to somebody in a parking lot about a month ago. And she was just saying, I love this parking lot. And I said, why? And she said, because my family is not here. But I've talked to these people over another month, and they feel like, what? Our relationships are improving. We're really working out how to get along. That is a big deal. That's a spiritual path. Now, it is the case that sometimes we are cloistered. Here we have some people who go away into solitary retreat for a little while. It's not by any means the majority of one's training, but it does happen. A little while means days, weeks, months. I've spent, a total of a couple years in solitary retreat in my life, which is still a very small percentage of the total monastic training that I've done. It's about 10%. But it's a part of the training. And so I would like to be clear about what it is to be cloistered, to be in solitary retreat so that people can make lockdown like that. Most important thing is you never, ever, ever go on the internet. So, this is what can you learn about living in lockdown from those who are living a monastic life? This is what never, ever go on the internet. Don't make phone calls. Don't check email for, months at a time. That is my recommendation for you if you want lockdown to be like a monastery. Now, maybe you can't do that because you're working or something. Well, okay, fine. Then make a schedule. You can be on the internet at these times. You can be on the phone at these times. And you may find that it's very difficult to do that because you want to be in community. Well, I'll come back to that. So another thing that I would say is very important in a monastery, which again is somewhat different from what people are doing nowadays in lockdown, is that in a monastery we work with thinking in a somewhat different way from how I have heard people are working with thinking in lockdown. So the basic instruction around thinking in a monastery, as I know it, is that's all. Yes. Don't do it. Don't think. As much as possible, don't think. If possible, don't think. Whenever possible, don't think. That's your job. That's what you're after. Don't think. And so, if you want lockdown to be something like a monastery, well then, whenever possible, don't think. Stop thinking. Pay attention to the feeling of your foot on the carpet. How does that feel exactly? The little squishy fibers. How do they feel? Don't think about it, just feel it. Notice on your next step, the fibers feel different because that part of the carpet is a little bit more trampled down. That's interesting, isn't it? That's a very different feeling, actually. These fibers aren't as squishy. Well, that's fascinating. And beyond that, when you look at them, you discover that the squishy fibers are shinier than the squished fibers. This is monastic life. Everything becomes fascinating, so fascinating that your thoughts are not. And in particular, don't think, and my advice for people now, don't think about the thing that everyone is thinking about. And I can tell you here, I think most people here just aren't thinking about this big issue that everybody's thinking about. I think we're thinking about it much less. And I'll come to the times when we do think in a second. But overall, we're not thinking about what? And it's actually funny, because in my notes, you can see here, it just says don't think about. And I forgot what it was. I didn't even finish the sentence. I just figured, I'll probably remember later. Whatever it is that people are thinking about, I'm not thinking about it much. It's this virus, for your information. That's the thing that everybody's thinking about. They think about it a lot. They talk about it a lot. They reiterate other people's thoughts a lot. This is really happening. And so, most important advice, don't think about that. For how long? Well, say a week. Go say a week without thinking about it. Something like that. Beyond that, if you do think, because you're not just reiterating the same thoughts again and again in a pattern, when you do think, you're more rational. And I have to say that this is another thing that I haven't seen. People don't seem more rational. People seem quite afraid, actually, and acting from, how do I say it? The way I put it recently, if we put it in terms of the popular version of neuroscience, which is more of a rhetorical device nowadays than scientific reporting. But it's as if everybody's amygdala is so overly taxed that it has just permanently shut down the front part of the brain. It says, sorry, you're not getting any blood. I need all of it because I'm exhausted. I am just so afraid of everything that you can't think rationally. You're going to have to think, but you can't think in any way that's going to make sense. And so this is another very important point, which is that as you live in a monastery, you gain in emotional intelligence along with rational thinking. So it isn't that thinking is bad. It's that we discover that as we stop thinking when we don't need to, the thoughts that we have are more rational. And we find that as we stop thinking when we don't need to, our emotions become more and more intelligent. This is very important. But there's another point that is very important about living in a monastery. And I think that this actually may be the basis of people thinking that monastics are so cloistered. I have the sense that monastics seem more distant than we really are, because my experience in living in a monastery is that we are totally part of the world. I feel that we're at the center of the world. A monastery is at the core of the world. We're facing all of the problems of the world to the best of our ability all the time, due to great compassion and kindness. And yet we seem distant. Why? It's because one of the most important things one does at a monastery is that we get out of the brainwashing of mainstream society. Now, why do we get out of that brainwashing? Why do we leave the mainstream mindset? It's because we see that the mainstream mindset is the biggest problem in the world. That the problems of the world are caused primarily by the human mind, and especially by the shared views of large numbers of people. And so it's of the utmost importance, if we want to save the world, that we stop participating in the source of the world's problems, and that means getting out of the mainstream perspective. It means we're no longer just one of the herd. We're no longer just going along with whatever we've been brainwashed to believe. And because of that, when people interact with us, it seems as if we're distant, because we don't right away connect on these ordinary assumptions that so many people hold. People hold deep assumptions. And again, and we'll come to one of these assumptions in a moment, again, I don't know that people living in lockdown now are more free of societal narratives than they were previously. I don't have that sense at all. Now, it's possible. I've spoken to someone recently who has a deep spiritual practice, and she feels that more and more of these cultural narratives to her are becoming stark and untenable, and so this has allowed her to mature even more, to become even more free. But I'd say that this is unusual. Most people are just repeating the same storylines. And in fact, I'd say that never before in the history of the world have so many people seen things in the same way. This event, if there's anything that it screams at us, it's for the first time, most people around the whole world are thinking the same stuff all the time. Everybody's just thinking about the same stuff in the same way. Very few people are able to function outside of this brainwashing, of this narrative. Because of that, we're cooperating at a level we've never seen before. Four billion people are in lockdown because of what? because of this enormous global cooperative effort to respond in a very specific way to a certain problem. So it's good for us to know that we can cooperate when we see things in the same way. But these views can take over. And it has to be somebody's job to decide which views are the beneficial ones, and that can't happen from within those views. And so monastics save the world because we become free of the views that run the world, and from that point can decide which views ought to run the world. Because we're outside of them, we're free from them, so they stop controlling our understanding. And we have the opportunity to see what is true beyond human perspectives and opinions. And then, out of compassion, we get involved in changing these views, these perspectives. And we see from there that it's the human views and perspectives that are shared by large numbers of people that are the most powerful force on the planet. There is nothing more powerful than, right now, than human beings' shared ideas. We see things in the same ways, and because of that, we're capable of incredible things, even destroying life on Earth, which is the direction that we've been headed in for thousands of years now. Accelerating in that direction. We become capable of incredible achievements. We can change the climate, we can change geography, we can cause countless species to go extinct. What we can do is extraordinary when we cooperate. But just mere power isn't enough. We also need wisdom and love, and so the question is, what views can empower wisdom and compassion? What can do that? To discover that, we have to get out of those views, which are inherently incorrect, see that which is beyond the human mind, and then, due to compassion, return with that wisdom to the human world and teach people views that will be of benefit. So that's what we do at monasteries. That is the service that monasteries give. We get out of the brainwashing of society, which runs the world. It runs the world. If you look at the assumptions that people make, people see the world in terms of materialism and individualism, humanism, or other things, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, the incredible array of shamanistic views. People see things in these various ways, and that runs their lives, that runs their societies, that runs, right now, civilization. And it's just assumed that that must be how it is. That must be the way it really is. But we get out of that brainwashing. We're capable of questioning what people aren't capable of questioning. It is exactly the things that we are incapable of questioning, the assumptions that we cannot doubt, that run the world. And so a monastery is a place where you get out of that and you gain power over that which has power over the world. That's why monasteries are the most powerful and the most influential institutions in all of world history. These are the places where the stories are told. And then people just retell the stories, and then the world happens. But once you tell the story a certain way, once you give people a certain set of assumptions, what happens next is determined by that. People have very little capacity to change their lives if they're not capable of questioning their stories. Nowadays, unfortunately, we have religions that teach certain things. We have monasteries, you could say, universities and such. That kind of monastery that's hedonistic and materialistic. And so we have a world that sees in terms of those stories. These places where people gather and are taught certain ways of looking at things so that they can be eligible for the priesthood, for the ruling class, and then they're told, go out, teach these stories. So there's power there, but the question is there wisdom and love. And so if we wish to make our lockdown into something more like a monastery, then we should understand that what we're basically doing is learning how to stop telling the normal stories by getting out of them. Right now we have a world in which some people tell this story and some people tell that story, and they argue and they point out what's wrong with each other's stories. But our job, which is why I'm talking about thinking and the importance of not doing it, is to actually stop telling stories entirely. Stop telling every story. Don't just criticize that story in order to tell this story. Stop telling all stories. Stop seeing the world in terms of narrative. Stop thinking. That is a major characteristic of monasteries. And so when you're in lockdown, after all, remember, you're not on the internet much. If you're in a monastery, you've cut that down drastically. And so you can put all of that time into just not thinking. And in that way, we can do as the individual who I mentioned earlier, we can get out of this mindset, gain power over it, and have an impact on the world. Another very important aspect of living in a monastery is that we face illness and death. And I'd say that people are considering illness and death. But that isn't what I mean when I say face illness and death. Facing illness and death means, to begin with, two things. One, don't deny it. And two, don't freak out about it. And these are both skills. It's difficult to stop denying illness and death. It's a very powerful pattern for us. It's not easy for us to face illness and death. It's also not easy for us to face it and yet not freak out. We tend to freak out. We see a lot of freak out now, a lot of anxiety. It's just amazing. I saw someone today who I haven't seen in a long time, and he just looked exhausted. His face was drawn. He looked weary. He didn't have the energy to look out of his eyes and see me. Because of this constant agitation. Everybody's been panicking for so long, their bodies are worn out. And so to gain these skills is hard and may take time. How, we should ask, can I face illness and death without denying it? How can I face illness and death without freaking out about it? That takes practice. It takes time. So it's okay if it takes time. Put some time into that every day. Get better at it. But beyond that, change the story around death. Because because I said we'd come to a certain example of an assumption. There's a certain assumption that people have which we need to question. We need to develop a mind that can see things differently. At this point, because our minds are relatively immature, we have the sense that death is bad, that people shouldn't die. It's just assumed. Nowadays, there's a whole death count. A lot of people are dying. People are paying very close attention to how many people are dying of this virus. And there's just the assumption the higher that number is, the worse things are. But is that true? Is it true that it's bad if human beings die? It's terrifying for most of us to consider that that might not be true. Our stories, many of our stories just fall apart if that isn't taken as a given. But if we develop our minds, deepen our minds, then we can start to consider the possibility that for human beings to die may not be a problem. In fact, that may be completely reasonable. In fact, just. Nowadays, when we look at death, for most people, when you look at the storylines being told, the first question is, who should we blame? There's a lot of blame happening. This person did that, this person didn't do this other thing. If they had done this, it would be better. If they had done that, it would have been better. But is it so bad that people die? Is it the case that human beings should live forever? Should we fight a war against death? We can look at ourselves in this way. Is it the case that I should live forever? If we believe that, why? Why? Why should you live forever? Why should I live forever? Does the universe really need me forever? Am I that important that a world without me in it would be worse? Why would it be worse? I had my time. It's time to move on. And beyond that, am I better off if I live forever in this world? Am I? Why? Because we have certain stories. We see this as the only world. We see death as the end. And we have a humanist view that says that human beings are the most important thing in the universe. That man is the measure of all things. It doesn't make sense for human beings to die. There's something wrong with the universe. It was a mistake that human beings die. Maybe it's God's mistake. Maybe it's a politician's mistake. Maybe it's a scientist's mistake. It's somebody's mistake. Somebody's wrong because we die. But is that wrong? Is it bad that we die? And then we become confused about the difference between death and killing. What is killing anyway? If somebody dies due to an illness and you could have done something to stop that, does that mean that you've killed them? Someone very close to me was very old, and she had to live for years beyond how long she wanted to live. Because we have decided that you should not die. You must not die. Death is the problem. Death is the enemy. To question this story is a great challenge for us. But we do it if we face illness and death. If we deeply face it, rather than denying it, rather than freaking out about it, and rather than blaming somebody for it. If we look at illness and death deeply. Is this virus really such a bad way for us to die? Our responses to this virus have drastically increased the amount of loneliness in the world. Loneliness is lethal. Loneliness is extremely dangerous. It's a threat. It increases our risk of death more than this virus. Recent report came out by the attorney, I don't remember exactly which. I shouldn't say it, I might be mistaken, so I'll leave it to you to research this. But a certain government official recently gave us a report on loneliness that claims, with a great deal of evidence, that being lonely is as dangerous, is as bad for our health as smoking 16 cigarettes a day. And I have to say that this person I saw today looked like he'd been smoking 16 cigarettes a day. A lot of people I see look like this. We're so lonely. So if we respond to this virus in such a way that we make people lonely, and then they die of that loneliness, have we killed them? This is an important question for us to ask. And if more people die of loneliness than would have died of the virus if we had done nothing, are we culpable? This is an important question for us to ask. Beyond that, is it the case that death is all about human beings? If this lockdown causes people to cause less environmental destruction, causes the economy to slow down, so that the earth is destroyed more slowly, that species go extinct more slowly, that ecological disaster happens a little bit later, haven't we saved many lives? So maybe we should have everyone under lockdown always. Maybe we should shut down the economy completely. But wait, the way we're shutting it down now is causing hunger, increasing hunger concerns, and other concerns for very poor people. Does that mean we're killing them? What I don't see is careful, considered investigation of these questions. I'm amazed at how little of this I see, because it's so hard for us to face illness and death. It is so difficult for us. The issue comes up and conversation shuts down. And I'm sorry to say that while in these other areas I can point out examples of people who are making this shutdown monastic, working with their families in new ways, getting out of brainwashing in different ways, I'm afraid I haven't been able to think of a single example of someone not living in a monastery who was able to use this crisis as a way to more effectively face illness and death, except for those who have already spent a long time deeply facing illness and death and have changed their views on it already. And beyond that, some people who claimed to have faced illness and death, with this coming up, it doesn't look that way anymore. That apparent ability to face it has crumbled. So I'm sorry, again, I haven't been able to see that. This is extremely challenging. This is very different from people living in an actual monastery, where most of the people I know who live in monasteries have used this as an opportunity to more effectively face illness and death. But this has to be faced, because it's the very fact that human beings are unwilling to die, in fact, that human beings are unwilling to even face death, that we are willing to kill. We're willing to kill life on this planet because we are unwilling to die. We're unwilling to even consider dying. We take it as a given that death of a human being is bad. And because of this, we're at war with our own nature. When you're when you start life, you get some stuff. It's only just that you should give it back at some point. You get a body and a mind. Give them back. Let go of them. They were never yours. You got to borrow them for a little while. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But you should be willing to give it back. Just like a 3-year-old who borrowed a toy from another kid. At a certain point, it's time to give it back. It's okay. You're going to be fine. You just give it back now. I know it's hard, but it's okay that it's hard. I know you're crying, but sometimes we cry. Now it's time to give it back. Now it's time to give your body back. Now it's time to give your mind back. It's okay. Just let go of them. They were never yours. That may be painful for you. That's okay too. You may be afraid, and that's okay too. You may hate this, and that also is okay. Because people aren't able to do this, because people aren't able to change their relationship with death, we human beings are causing more killing than, well, we're causing a major extinction on the planet, which may end up being the most extreme extinction of all of the history of life. But we're already at major extinction levels. It's terrifying. We're willing to kill and kill and kill so that we don't even have to think about dying. Can we change this? If we can use this opportunity to truly face illness and death, then that would be an incredible achievement. And what happens when we do that? What happens is that we dedicate our lives. We dedicate our lives to the benefit of all life. We give our lives over to compassion for all beings. Because we stop being stuck on this mind and this body and this life. And we stop living a life in which we're constantly trying to hold on to that which isn't ours, our minds and our bodies and our lives. And we give those things away freely out of compassion. This is a much happier life. As we say in Buddhism, most people in the world live lives in which they're in constant conflict with the entire universe, fighting a war with the entire world that they know they will inevitably lose. What is that war? It's, I'm not going to die. I don't want to die. You die. I'll kill you. But we will die, however many people we kill. However many beings we destroy, we'll still die. We know we're going to lose. This is a terrible suffering. It's anxiety, it's agitation, it's fear. But when we face all that and dedicate our lives to all beings, then that dissolves. And we experience happiness and peace due to the deep compassion of dedicating our lives to all beings. If we look at this in terms of the scriptures, there's a wonderful section that we've been studying here recently. And it's worth reading it to get a sense of what this practice is like. It's good to look at something different from the ordinary stories that most of us have been engaged in. So let's just read it. It's just short. It's about, I suppose, about 5 minutes or so. Everything they do, these bodhisattvas. A bodhisattva is a person who's dedicated their life to enlightenment. All that they do is due to concern for all beings. Due to the support of carrying out past commitments, that means their commitments to being of service to others. Due to being led by great compassion, due to realization of great kindness. So everything we do is a result of concern for all beings, supported by the knowledge that we have successfully been of service in the past, led by great compassion because we've realized great kindness. It's due to being principally focused on omniscience. We want full awakening, complete knowledge. We don't hold back to some smaller goal than that. We understand that this is unimaginable, incomprehensible. It could take a long time. We may never get there, but we're focused on it. Due to being engaged in the full accomplishment of the powers, the expertise, the qualities, the characteristics, and the voice of all enlightened ones. That's what we're working on achieving. We ourselves want to achieve that. It's due to being in quest of the final supreme truth. We're in quest of that, of complete, perfect truth. That doesn't fit into some idea, some doctrine. It's beyond all of that, and we're in quest of that. It's due to following what is learned of the liberation of the profound teachings of the Buddhas, and it's due to reflection on the great power of skill in liberative means. So we're even committed to learning how to be of service at the highest level, teaching the true Dharma, the true teaching to all beings, helping each one according to their own needs. Moreover, the Bodhisattvas are freed from all points of attachment. They're freed from what is considered wealth, what is considered one's own possessions, what is guarded and kept. We don't have attachment to what is considered wealth. We give it all away. If you want this to be a monastic experience, then give away all of your wealth. That's all. You're in lockdown? Great. Give away everything. Give away your home. Give away your wealth. Give away your possessions. What is considered one's own possessions? We realized it was never our own. What is guarded and kept, the things that we hold on to, that's what's causing us suffering. We let go of all of it. And what is it that we guard and keep the most? It's listed right here. We're freed from attachment to what is thought of, what is ruminated on, and what is conceived of. That's what human beings hold on to most tightly, what we think, what we ruminate on, what we conceive of. We hold on to that very tightly, but in a monastic setting, in this training environment, we let go of all of that. We let go of that which appears and disappears, aroused by attachment to the ideas of a self, a being, a life, a person, a personality, the mental and physical constituents, the elements, and the sense media. We hold on to all of that, the sense of me as a person. We're attached to ourselves, attached to this body and mind, as it says, attached to what we experience in our sense consciousness. Whatever that is, it could be a meal, it could be a movie, it could be another person, it could be an idea. But in any case, we let go of all of that. And it turns out that this is marvelous. This is joyful. Trying to hold on to all that was painful, was suffering. Beyond that, whatever acts should not be done are disapproved of by the enlightened ones and provoke affliction. These bodhisattvas get rid of. We don't do bad things. We don't do things that shouldn't be done. We realize that that's what life is all about. Life is this amazing adventure in which you can stop doing things you shouldn't do. It's so challenging. We all know how challenging that is. There's something we shouldn't do and we do it anyway. What do we do about it? We realize this is the exciting part of life. This is the challenge. This is mastery over that which has mastered us. It's incredible to be able to stop doing what shouldn't be done. Beyond that, whatever acts should be done are approved of by the enlightened ones and are appropriate for the provisions of the path to enlightenment. These actions the bodhisattvas take on. And we realize, look at all the things that I should be doing that I'm not doing. But I can learn how to do those things. I can do them all the time. This is fantastic. This is what life's all about. And finally, it's as if our lives have turned right side out. Finally, that which was upside down is turned over, and you realize, that's how it was supposed to be the whole time. It's not about getting things and holding on to things and possessing things and protecting things. No. It's about learning how to stop doing what I don't want to do and start doing what I do want to do, and realizing that what I don't want to do is that which is unvirtuous. What I do want to do is actually that which is virtuous. I'm amazing. I really want to be compassionate and caring. I do. It's my nature. It's fantastic. I'm not actually selfish and hateful, deluded and ignorant. No. And life makes sense finally. As we stop turning everything inside out and backwards and upside down by making it about what can I get out of this. There's a great relief. There's a great joy, a great tranquility. And this serenity leads to awakening. As the bodhisattvas increasingly develop the elements of the path accomplished by skill and means and wisdom for the attainment of the way, their minds accordingly become gentle, mild, workable, and altruistic, unafflicted, seeking the final ultimate excellence, seeking higher knowledge, liberating all beings, obeying and respecting their teachers, practicing the teachings as they have learned them. This is how you make lockdown like a monastery. You make sure that your mind is gentle, mild, workable, and altruistic, unafflicted, seeking the final ultimate excellence, seeking higher knowledge, liberating all beings, obeying and respecting your teachers, meaning do what we're saying here. That's what that means. And practicing the teachings as they've learned them. Well, now you've learned these teachings, so practice them. That's how you do it. They also become grateful and appreciative of what has been done for them. So, you want lockdown to be monastic? Be constantly grateful and appreciative of what has been done for you. Become extremely courageous. Yes! That's what this is all about. This is about bringing forth great courage. Become easy to live with, honest, gentle, uncomplicated, undiluted, free from conceit, easy to talk to, skillful in grasping others' meaning. That's how you do it. Live in lockdown as follows. Be easy to live with. Be honest. Be gentle. Don't be complicated. Don't be deluded. Be free from conceit. Be easy to talk to. And be skillful in understanding what people are saying. Thus, the bodhisattvas attain patience, self-control, and tranquility. Thus, patient, controlled, and calm, they contemplate the elements of the path to purify the higher stages with unremitting vigor, unafflicted vigor, unregressing vigor, immense vigor, endless vigor, blazing vigor, unequaled vigor, invincible vigor, vigor in developing all beings to maturity, vigor in discerning what is instructive and what is not. And their mentality becomes more and more purified, their prevailing will continues, and their element of zeal blazes. Great roots of goodness are produced, and they accomplish destruction of worldly defilements. All their doubts and uncertainties are cut off, and they accomplish presence of mind free from doubt. They attain joy and serenity. They come into the presence of the power of the enlightened ones and attain immeasurable will. So that's what it's like to live in lockdown, if it's monastic. We have this much vigor, this much courage, this much zeal, this unshakable will. It's amazing. And what does that mean practically? Well, if it's monastic and we dedicate our life in this way, then the first thing we give up is our own home. We give it up. If it's monastic. I'm not saying that it has to be monastic. But my concern is that most people are just really in their own home right now. That's an issue. The term for becoming a monastic in traditional Buddhism is going forth, leaving home and entering homelessness. The term in Japan, the word in Japanese, where I was ordained, is shukkei, which means to leave home. And so I have an idea for you, since community is so important and you want to make lockdown good, you want to make lockdown productive and spiritual. This is what you do. Move into someone else's home. Be locked down in someone else's home. Then you have more community, more disagreements. You have more opportunities to become easy to live with and easy to talk to. Leave your home. Do not have lockdown in your own home. It would even be better if you just traded homes with someone else. But even better than that, live together. Yes. Move right in with your whole family into another place with their whole family. This is a good way to train. And beyond that, as I said before, loneliness is a terrible problem right now that is scarring people. So you could at least invite someone else into your home to live until the end of all this, and maybe beyond. Why not? Invite a few people, a dozen people. Why not? We have a few dozen people living here. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. Beyond that, because you're in this wonderful opportunity, having entered a monastic lifestyle of lockdown in someone else's home without thinking or going on the internet, but instead engaging in intimate relations with people who you don't particularly like anymore, but good news, you still love them. You face illness and death with a state of mind that has overcome what we call the hindrances in Buddhism, these hindrances to wisdom. Because you've moved into someone else's home, you've given up covetousness and want, which is very good. You've given up the things that are yours. You've given up your own possessions. Nice work. You overcame one of the hindrances. Congratulations. But you also, because of that, have overcome hatred. It's very important that as you practice, you develop deep love and overcome hatred. And that, again, I'm sorry to say, it looks like we have a real hatred problem right now. People, first of all, are very mad at other people. It's your fault, and it's your fault, and it's your fault. But beyond that, just to bring this home, to make this a bit more raw, domestic violence is skyrocketing. This is a case in which hatred in this lockdown situation is not being overcome, but instead is being acted on. Child abuse is increasing dramatically and continuing to increase. Alcohol consumption is increasing. Sexual, physical, emotional, verbal abuse of people we're living with is increasing right now. It's horrifying. Again, I'm sorry, I'm trying to see how in society we are living a monastic lifestyle, but I'm seeing some things go in the other direction. Now, I know some people who are really working on this, really trying to find a way to love. But when I see people out there, I'm sorry to say it doesn't look like a close, loving connection to me. They're afraid. We're training ourselves to be afraid of each other. It's so frightening. If we're going to do this distancing, then we have to retrain our minds to love even more, to be able to be more capable of connecting. Now, some people, you see, it happens that people think, oh, it's so nice to see you. And that's something to rejoice about. Some of us have gotten so lonely that we love seeing each other. We don't hate each other. We're so grateful just to see someone, whoever it is. And that should bring forth great joy for us. But we have to accept that as a society as a whole, we're seeing evidence that may not be happening for everyone. Beyond that, anxiety also skyrocketing. Hotlines right now around anxiety and other mental illnesses, meaning we're talking about serious anxiety. Calls to these hotlines have increased by several 100% over the past several weeks. And depression is also increasing. Calls to suicide hotlines have increased by over 1,000%. Because of the depression and the loneliness that we're experiencing right now. It's essential that we overcome these hindrances. That is difficult. That's hard work. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. This question doesn't assume that it's easy. And so if it's hard, it's not because you're doing something wrong. It's not because you're wrong. It's hard to overcome these things. Any of us who have tried to overcome these things understand that this is a real challenge. But because we're in this state right now, we must dedicate ourselves to that. How can we bring forth compassion rather than hatred? How can we cultivate calm, tranquility rather than anxiety? How can we bring forth energy and vigor and a love for life, a zeal for this beautiful day rather than depression? How can we do it? It's in striving for this that we can do it. And again, it's through living with people who can pull us out of our heads, out of our thoughts, that we do it. We're so deeply caught up in our ways of looking at things. We need people to pull us out of it. That's why it's so important that we're in some kind of community, people who we have to be with even if we don't want to be with them. It's exactly when we're most lonely that we have the hardest time connecting. We can't just leave it up to us to decide when we want to connect with people. It has to be given to us. But most important of all, beyond all of this, I would say that if we want to make this lockdown situation monastic, then we do the thing that, to my knowledge, nothing trains us for better than a strict, rigorous, traditional monastery. There are a lot of things that train us to do this. Making a business, having a family, entering the military. All those things help with this thing that I'll mention in a moment. But nothing, to my knowledge, does a better job at this than living in a stern, clear, traditional monastery. And that is training us to use each next crisis as a way to rise to an even greater crisis. That's the challenge. We become capable of dealing with a certain challenge, but the real challenge is how do we make use of what we learn there to rise to an even greater challenge? So we have this crisis, yes, it's a significant crisis, but we have more crises than that, and those crises are much more dangerous. This virus is not going to wipe out even one species. Certainly isn't going to wipe out our species. It's not a serious crisis. It's a big deal. If we do nothing about it, we handle it really badly, a few 100 million people may die. But there are other crises much more dangerous than that. They're so frightening that we don't even face them. Then what would we do if there were a nuclear war? We can't even think about it anymore. It's exhausted us. It probably just won't happen, we hope. Maybe it won't happen. And then it's just out of our minds. And then it's months before we think about it again. And that's just one of many crises that may kill many more than a few 100 million people. And this virus isn't threatening other species. But nuclear war threatens all species. Global warming threatens all species. Various technological developments threaten all species. It's terrifying. But we can use this crisis to get better at dealing with crises, to get better at expressing our love for all beings. This deep compassion. We do all of this. We live life just as an expression of love for all beings. We live this life, we love this life because it's a way to express our love for all life. And we face this crisis as a way to become better at that, to express even more compassion for all beings. I'm very worried. I think human beings might kill this virus. It's a real concern. It's not threatening our species, but we are threatening its entire existence. That's not right. We should have compassion for all living things. A lot of people are trying to wipe it out. But why? Why are we that important? It seems terrifying to us, but in fact, by letting go of that deep self-importance, we relax our hearts and we can be happy in a new way. It seems frightening, but if you try it, it works. The goal of life isn't just to survive. The goal of life is to love. And love means that we're willing to give everything away, including our own bodies, our own minds, our own lives. This is living out of love. To learn how to do this is extremely difficult. Therefore, each next challenge that comes up, we appreciate it. We're grateful for it. And we see, okay, we did some things well, we did some things badly, we can do those things well next time, and we can improve on the bad things. We're going to get better and better at this. We're going to use this crisis as a way of developing self-confidence so that we as a species can face the even greater crises that we ourselves are creating. That's the hard part. That's the huge challenge that is our incredible opportunity in the modern era. We can finally do what we haven't done. That is, face that the greatest threat to this planet is our own mind. The greatest threat to our own happiness is our own mind. From the smallest scale of our own depression to the greatest scale of life on earth, the challenge is our own mind. We've known, I think, if you ask me why have we become so infatuated with this sickness, it's because we know now that the real challenge is our own mind. And then happily, something else came up that we could freak out about. And so we became obsessed about it because we feel like, good, we're back to being able to blame something other than our own choices. That feels great. That's a real relief. But if we live in a monastery, then we consistently, diligently, carefully, and skillfully turn that around and remember the great challenge of life is to make better choices. We will do what should be done. We will not do what shouldn't be done. We will purify our own minds. We'll cultivate our own minds. We'll liberate our own minds. That's an extremely difficult challenge. But it is the challenge that monastics take on. And so we take on this relatively simple, easy challenge, the coronavirus. That's a challenge. It's a crisis. It's actually amazing. It's just right. If it were any less, well, we wouldn't have the chance to really freak out, and so we couldn't learn how to work with that. For any more, well then, that might be a real crisis that endangers the earth, like the other crises that we have. It's just right. It's as if it was scripted for us. We've been given this perfect challenge level to learn how to deal with something horrifying that's beyond our current ability, a challenge that's greater than what we can now deal with. But good news, we can use this. We can use the challenge of solving a problem outside of ourselves to deal with the great challenge of solving the problem in our own minds. And with that, we can experience liberation, true peace, and the highest happiness that allows us to completely surrender our lives, completely offer our lives for the benefit of all beings. And that itself becomes the great challenge. It becomes exciting. We have a spiritual realization. It's great. Now we see things in a new and more accurate way, and beyond that, we're filled with joy. But soon enough, we realize, what's even better? Now that I have all this joy, I can subject myself to even greater suffering without going insane. I can enter the suffering of the world, helping others even more. I can hold others with even more care until I become exhausted, but with all this energy, I can be of even greater service. It becomes exciting to return back to our old level of suffering because we're capable of receiving all of the suffering of all of these other people. We have all this energy, which means we can use it to be of service until we're equally exhausted again. We have all this happiness so we can give it away to people until we're suffering again. We have new wisdom, and so we can get involved in even more difficult circumstances until we're confused again. And then from that place, we can do it again. We can rise to that challenge. Constantly taking in more and more of these beautiful, incomprehensibly precious living things. Expressing more and more love with each next day. This is living in a monastery. Not being secluded, not being cloistered, but being connected, joyfully connected to all living things. Not keeping our life separate, but instead breaking through that separation. So that my life is completely relinquished. If we are living like this, well, then I'd say we're all living like monastics these days. And I'd say that is what we as a society can learn about living in lockdown from those who are living a monastic life. So let us take advantage of this. Let us take advantage of this by connecting with community, by thinking as little and as rationally as possible, by gaining an emotional intelligence and escaping from the brainwashing of a society that is moving in a direction of destruction. Let us face illness and death so fully that we relinquish our attachment and can dedicate our lives. Let us therefore use spiritual exercises to attain insight, peace, and true happiness, and use that to connect with all living things. Breaking through the separation that prevents us from using each next crisis, each next day, to even more fully offer our love to the world. Let us move forward in this direction and in this way for the benefit of all living things.